Well, I am very pleased to have Preston Sprinkle with us this morning. He is a dear friend of our church, and we have invested in him and his ministry. He's the president of the Center for Faith and Sexuality. Really sort of easy topics there to address in these times. He's the author of some wonderful books. One book that I love on the subject of homosexuality is A People to Be Loved. And you've got a new book coming out, I think this fall, called Embodied, dealing with transgenderism. I think October is the current release date for that. And, you really choose the easy topics to go after. I imagine that your autobiography, Preston, is going to be called A Theologian to Be Loved after all the comments that you get from dealing with these subjects.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me on. The Embodied book is actually, we pushed it back to February to release it because I don't think anybody's gonna be thinking about anything besides the election between now and November. So we decided to push the release back. But it's been an interesting journey, but filled with, sure, a lot of criticism, misunderstanding, attacks, but a lot of really positive feedback, So it's been an interesting ride.
We're going to be talking about 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. Mm-hmm. And interestingly enough, Paul refers to sexual immorality in our passage. Why do you think he considers sexual immorality so inextricably linked with the proclamation of the gospel?
That's a great question. And I mean, your assumption built into the question is absolutely correct. The Christian sexual ethic was sort of seen as wrapped up in a person's conversion experience. And I think that has to do with, the wider Greco-Roman culture that a lot of these early Christian converts were being saved out of, especially a town like Thessalonica was mostly a Gentile community. So you have Gentile converts to Christianity. Now, what was their previous life like? A Gentile living in first century, Thessalonica under the Roman Empire. I mean, sexual freedom was pretty widespread in the Greco-Roman mindset. I mean, we think the 60s were, a little wild, or even today we think, oh my gosh, this is just the worst kind of sexualized culture you could ever live in. Well, we haven't even, we're not even close to where it was in first century Rome. Judeo-Christianity had a very different, very countercultural, one might even say strict, I would say life-giving sexual ethics, so that when somebody left behind their Greco-Roman Gentile ways, it almost certainly meant leaving behind a really different kind of sexual ethic and embracing a new one, which is why we see sexual immorality tethered so much with the gospel call. To follow Jesus, to call him Lord, especially in the first century, meant taking on a really new view of what it means to be a sexual person. For Augustine, who had a really wild sexual past, used to say that, our hearts are restless until they find their rest in you, O Lord. And so I do think there is some connection. I know for us moderns, it's hard to even see it this way, but some connection between our sexuality and our longing for God. Also, you see throughout the scriptures that when people fall away from God, we see this in so many passages, especially in the Old Testament, idolatry, falling away from God in general was almost always correlated with sexual immorality.
The first 3 chapters of Thessalonians is so tender and so loving and so encouraging and such exhorting of them to, he's so proud of them. And I think about that, if we're going to speak to people about sexual immorality, or if we're going to speak to them about having some course correction in their life, that it has to be done in that sort of encouraging spirit. I've got to know that you love me before I'm going to accept your correction in one of the most intimate places of my life.
You know what's interesting? Just as you're talking, I mean, anybody who's been to Bible college knows, like the church at Thessalonica was basically probably the best church Paul wrote to. In his 13 letters, he goes out of his way to praise them. And yet, apparently, because he feels the need to give this reminder about sexual immorality, they might have been struggling with this. That's really fascinating. From Paul's perspective, he's writing to a group of people who he clearly believes are kind of off the chart godly, and yet they're still struggling with something like sexual immorality. Some of them might have committed adultery or had sex outside of marriage or whatever. Like, and this again might be the healthy corrective to some of the fallout with the purity movement, where affirming somebody could do something like engage in sexual immorality, which is sin and wrong. We shouldn't do it. It's a really big deal. And yet that doesn't mean the totality of their existence is, bad. They could have virtuous in so many other areas, really struggling in this area. And it's okay to praise all the other virtues in the other area. That's exactly what Paul does here.
And they're Gentiles coming into a new experience, that they haven't been in this Christian life long. And again, I think not shirking the truth, but doing it in a very grace-filled way, in a way that says, hey, I'm walking alongside you and I'm praying for you day after day, and I'm so proud of you. I think that's where real change can happen.
Yeah, one of the things that prevents real change is shame around sexuality in the church. This is a huge, huge issue that more and more people are writing about now, that there's so much stigma and shame surrounding pornography use, or even especially a young female who has had sex before or outside of marriage. There's so much shame that surrounds that. We now know that shame just adds as a roadblock to actually receiving forgiveness and getting back on the right path.
Tell us a little bit about your work at the Center for Faith and Sexuality. Let the folks know what you do there.
Sure, yeah. So the Center for Faith, Sexuality, and Gender, we've been around for about 3.5 years, and our main focus is helping Christian leaders, churches, and pastors engage questions about faith, sexuality, and gender with theological faithfulness and courageous love. So even this, throughout our talk, we've kind of woven together, truth and grace, and and that's something we try to do at the center, is present and articulate, and even if need be, defend a historic Christian biblical view of sexuality and marriage. And also, we want to help people pastor their people well in that. Not just pastors, like formal pastors like you are, but I mean any kind of Christian who's in a leadership, mentorship position, who is going to help walk people in and through this conversation. We want them to do it with a robust commitment to truth, and also to have a posture that kind of like what we were just saying, that we can walk alongside somebody in grace and compassion and understanding in whatever they're struggling with. So we've been busy the last 3.5 years.
We're so grateful that you're on the front line and having the conversations and doing the important work of thinking theologically about these kinds of issues that we haven't never dealt with before. And you're on the front line, and I appreciate your willingness to be there and to venture out and say, here's what I think, and take the arrows so that the conversation can be had. Thank you for the work that you do.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been great partnering with you guys.
God bless you, Preston. We love you.
Thank you. God bless you guys.